But I think if one were to lump Saudi Arabia with Senegal, or Egypt with Indonesia, or for that matter, Iraq with, say, Malaysia, and refer to them all as somehow Islamic, and therefore to treat their issues, their conflicts, even those conflicts that do have to do with religion, as Islamic conflicts, I think is sort of missing the nuances that make such a huge difference, not just in helping to explain what's taking place in that region, but much more importantly, in helping to figure out what to do about it, how to resolve these issues. So in that sense, I think that kind of turmoil is correct. The Wahhabization, the sort of puritanical movement that has been seizing in large parts of the Muslim world, that has been sort of ascendant over the last couple of decades, only in the last few years, and very, very clearly so as a direct result of the war in Iraq, has been dramatically ascendant. In a sense, what the Arab and Muslim population, particularly of the Middle East, this population that because of the geopolitical fragmentation of that region has been so discombobulated and chaotic and separated from each other, and a real rising sense of individualism and nationalization has begun to grab hold, particularly of this young generation. We're talking about a region in which 75% is under the age of 35. But nevertheless, over the last few years, I've been watching a sort of new coalescing taking place in the Muslim world, a new kind of pan-Islamism, pan-Arabism that has essentially focused on the war in Iraq and this vehement sense of anti-Americanism that is becoming also anti-Christian and anti-Jewish sentiment that's starting to bind this community together in a way that they weren't bound for decades and decades.
Well, it's interesting because in my read of your book is very much that that what's going on is really 1,500 years of Islamic history coming up to a period of reformation, which is largely internally created within Islam.
Very much.
And that America, the rest of the world, is sort of, they're not innocent bystanders, they're complicit bystanders, but in a sense, not part of the central narrative that you're talking about. And now, hearing you speak, it's very much like the America-British attack on Iraq has changed that. I mean, does it really have the power to make that much difference?
It's impossible, I think, for me to exaggerate how drastically the war in Iraq has affected the Muslim world, and more importantly, has affected this internal sort of debate over how to move forward, how to create an indigenous Islamic modernist movement. That debate has been drastically affected by this war. My book was finished in 2004, and it's quite an optimistic book because it says, look, if you look at the demographics of this region, if you look at the rising tide of individualism and this overwhelming desire, particularly amongst the youth of this region, to come up with ways to reconcile their identities with the realities of the modern world, not to appease the West, but to essentially grab a piece of that promise of democracy, that promise of societal evolution, that alone is reason for optimism. In the 2 years since this book has been out, in 3 years, things have changed in such a drastic way that young, individualistic, sort of unanchored population now, rather than looking towards the West for the, not example, but kind of the impetus for creating a truly Islamic modernism, is now shunning the West in the worst way possible, and frankly taking the ultimatum that we've given them at face value. The President in the State of the Union address said, "You are either with us or you're with the terrorists." That's a pretty easy decision to make for a lot of young Muslims in the Arab world, and unfortunately they've made it. Now, they're not strapping bombs to their body, but this isn't what we're talking about. This is a marketing campaign over the thoughts, the minds, the hearts of a very large audience which is turned away from us and maybe for a generation, if not more.
Now, do you see it that way?
No. I mean, I should say that I certainly see the latter half of Reza's explanation that way. I think that the so-called war on terror has been disastrous for any attempts on the part of America and its allies to show that the values that enable us to be human are indeed universal, and the rights that we have as human beings are universal. But I also have to disagree on a number of other fronts. It is not quite as monolithic as the passion with which Reza delivers his explanation suggests. As a senior fellow with the European Foundation for Democracy, I spend a lot of time, particularly in Western Europe. And every time I go there, it never fails, I get young Muslims coming up to me whispering that they wish they lived in America. Sadly, they never say Canada. And I try not to be offended at that we would offer them probably that much more opportunity. But they say they wish they lived in America. I say, even in the age of Gitmo and the Patriot Act? Absolutely, they say, because in America, you can be more than just a Muslim. Whereas in Western Europe, because of the strident secularism bordering on atheism that sort of reduces them to second-class citizens on the part of non-Muslims, and because of the tribalism that they experience at the hands of their own in the Muslim community, they are, reduced to simply being Muslims. Whereas they know, as individuals, they are so much more, and that Islam allows them to be so much more. I also have to respectfully push back on a couple of other points that Reza made. One is, I think, Reza, it may not be possible for you to overestimate the damage that the war on terror has done, but I think you severely underestimate why Muslims have to take responsibility for what we have done by way of damage to Islam. As I document in my own book, long before, and I document it, I don't simply state it, long before European colonialism took off and the State of Israel was born and the CIA came into being, Muslims have been bludgeoning each other's freedoms and imposing martial law.